Trayvon Martin was a teenager who carried the world lightly on his shoulders, at least in appearance. At 17, he possessed a quiet confidence, a spark of curiosity in his eyes, and an easy laugh that drew people to him. He lived in Sanford, Florida, a town that to the outside world seemed calm and ordinary. Quiet streets lined with single-family homes, trimmed lawns, and occasional playgrounds echoing with children's laughter. To Trayvon, Sanford was home, a place where friends gathered after school, where he could immerse himself in music, basketball, and the small joys of teenage life. On that late winter afternoon, Trayvon left his father's fiancée's house with a bag of Skittles and an iced tea in hand. The convenience store had been warm and familiar, a place where the clerk already knew his name. Outside, the streets were quiet, the sun beginning its slow descent behind the trees, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. He adjusted his hoodie, pulled his headphones closer, and let music fill the silence, oblivious to the tension slowly threading its way through the neighborhood. The walk from the store to the house was supposed to be short, no more than a few minutes. Trayvon had done this walk countless times. His mind wandered through the usual teenage preoccupations: homework he'd put off, the joke he'd share with his friends later, the small ambitions of a boy who wanted to photograph the world one day. Yet despite the ordinary nature of the moment, there was an undercurrent he could not yet see. Elsewhere, George Zimmerman, a neighborhood watch volunteer, was making his rounds. Zimmerman took pride in his role, seeing himself as a protector, a man standing between order and chaos. To him, danger lurked in every shadow, and Trayvon, walking alone in a hoodie, instantly fit into that imagined threat. Zimmerman's perception was framed by fear and suspicion, a lens that would distort the events about to unfold. Back on the sidewalk, Trayvon passed the houses that lined the street. Families were inside, dinner preparations underway, unaware of the tragedy that was about to ripple through their community. Trayvon waved at neighbors he knew casually. They waved back. The scene could have been any normal evening in an American suburb. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and pavement warming in the lingering sun. In his backpack were notebooks filled with doodles, photos he'd taken of sunsets and friends, reminders of a boy who had yet to confront the harshness of the world outside his own skin. The story briefly shifts to Trayvon's family, painting the intimate world he came from. His mother, Sabrina Fulton, is introduced through her recollections of him, the way he would burst into the kitchen with an infectious grin, the way he nurtured a small puppy with delicate hands, the way he confided in her about dreams too big for the world he lived in. His father, Tracy Martin, remembers quiet conversations about life, trust, and the importance of being aware in a world that didn't always play fair. The warmth of family life is highlighted, contrasting with the cold events that would soon unfold, creating a poignant tension. As Trayvon continued his walk, there were subtle, almost imperceptible hints of tension in the neighborhood. A car slowed near the corner. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. While these moments were ordinary in isolation, the narrative gives them a weight that foreshadows the coming conflict. These are the small, cinematic details that build suspense without explicitly revealing danger, keeping the audience on edge. In this part of the story, there's also a focus on Trayvon's internal world. He hums along to a song, briefly smiles at the lyrics, and thinks about meeting friends later. His thoughts are interrupted only by the casual observation of a man moving behind him. The audience is made aware of this presence, but Trayvon is not, creating dramatic irony. Every step he takes, every casual glance becomes loaded with tension, drawing readers deeper into the narrative. The narrative pauses to reflect on Trayvon's personal ambitions. He dreams of photographing moments others overlook, capturing beauty in ordinary life, and someday leaving his mark on the world. These dreams, juxtaposed against the events that will unfold, create a tragic contrast, emphasizing what is lost, what is never realized, and what the audience should mourn. At this point, the story also subtly introduces societal context. The town of Sanford, while outwardly peaceful, is a place where racial tensions simmer beneath the surface. Trayvon, as a young black teenager, moves through spaces often perceived differently by others, his presence misinterpreted, his normalcy questioned. The narrative carefully layers this context without being overtly didactic, allowing readers to feel the tension and anticipate the potential danger. Trayvon reaches a section of the street flanked by trees and narrow sidewalks. The sun dips further, shadows grow sharper, and the ordinary walk home takes on a cinematic weight. The narrative focuses on sensory details: the crunch of leaves beneath his shoes, the distant hum of a passing car, the rustle of branches. Each detail is amplified to heighten the suspense, making the audience feel like they are walking with him, sensing the quiet foreboding that Trayvon himself does not yet perceive. The tension rises as Trayvon passes by a neighborhood watch volunteer, George Zimmerman, for the first time. The narrative briefly shifts to Zimmerman's perspective, his eyes narrowing, his body tensing, his internal monologue framing Trayvon as a possible threat. This perspective switch creates a psychological tension for the audience, who now sees the collision of two worlds: Trayvon's innocence and Zimmerman's suspicion. The audience is acutely aware that the ordinary walk, so filled with routine and youthful energy, is now charged with unseen peril. Trayvon Martin's walk was almost over, or so it seemed. The streets of Sanford had grown quieter with the evening's approach, the orange glow of the setting sun giving way to the cooler shadows of approaching night. Every leaf, every tree branch, every uneven stretch of sidewalk seemed to stretch longer than it should. Trayvon, engrossed in his music and thoughts of his next encounter with friends, didn't notice the figure that had begun following him a few streets back. George Zimmerman, sitting in his car parked along the edge of the neighborhood, adjusted his rearview mirror. He saw the teenager in the hoodie, his bag of snacks, his music headphones, a seemingly ordinary boy. But in Zimmerman's mind, ordinary and innocent blurred with suspicion. His pulse quickened slightly. He imagined the worst. Was this a prowler, a potential thief, or just a boy out for a late walk? In his own mind, Zimmerman had become the guardian of the neighborhood, a man standing vigil against danger lurking in unexpected places. He stepped out of the car. His movements were deliberate but calculated, his eyes never leaving Trayvon. He called in to the local authorities via 911, stating his concern. Trayvon's back was to him, unaware of the eyes upon him. The dispatcher's calm voice over the phone instructed Zimmerman not to follow, but Zimmerman, convinced that his intervention was necessary, hesitated. A sense of duty and paranoia intertwined. Trayvon's perspective remained innocent. He hummed along with his music, crunching leaves beneath his sneakers, glancing occasionally at the streetlights flickering on ahead. He felt safe. This was a neighborhood he had known his entire life. The ordinary sounds of suburban life, the distant television through a neighbor's window, the faint barking of dogs, the rustle of a breeze through trees, were comforting, not foreboding. He had no reason to suspect that a single, fateful encounter awaited him in the shadows ahead. As Trayvon neared a wooded area that separated streets, the tension begins to rise. The narrative alternates between perspectives to amplify suspense. From Zimmerman's point of view, Trayvon's hood and posture are interpreted as threatening, a silhouette of danger framed by dim streetlights. From Trayvon's perspective, there is an uneasy awareness, a fleeting glance over his shoulder, a gut feeling that someone might be following, but he dismisses it, assuming he's mistaken. The walk becomes a silent game of anticipation. Every crunch of leaves under Trayvon's sneakers echoes louder in the quiet evening. Every shift in shadow seems suspicious. Zimmerman's footsteps are deliberate but not loud. He is careful to stay behind, yet close enough to monitor. The tension builds because the audience knows what Trayvon cannot. Suspense is anchored in the dramatic irony of two worlds colliding, one boy's innocence, one man's fear-fueled vigilance. Trayvon pauses briefly, pulling a hoodie tighter against the cooling air. He remembers his mother's text, "Be safe, Trayvon, don't take any chances." It's a simple message, yet haunting in retrospect, a reminder of the fragility of ordinary life and the unpredictability of fate. The scene lingers on Trayvon's hand holding the bag of Skittles, emphasizing small details that humanize him and foreshadow tragedy. The phone call between Zimmerman and the dispatcher continues in the background, a thread of official oversight that fails to prevent what's coming. The dispatcher's calm instructions contrast with Zimmerman's anxiety-fueled misjudgment. The audience senses a ticking clock, each moment stretching longer than it should, the inevitable clash building minute by minute. As Trayvon reaches the wooded stretch, the narrative slows, drawing attention to small, cinematic details. A breeze moves through the trees, carrying faint sounds of distant cars and cicadas. The shadows grow longer, the sky deepens into the purples and blues of early night. Trayvon's footsteps falter slightly, not out of fear, but curiosity. The narrative mirrors this pause, heightening suspense, allowing the audience to feel both the serenity and underlying tension of the setting. Suddenly, the encounter escalates. Trayvon senses a presence behind him. He glances over his shoulder and sees a figure, a man approaching. Confused but not yet alarmed, Trayvon quickens his pace. Zimmerman, on edge, confronts Trayvon verbally, demanding answers, trying to assert authority in a situation that has spun beyond reason. Words are exchanged, heated yet brief, carrying the weight of misunderstanding and fear. The struggle begins quickly, almost uncontrollably. Trayvon, confused and defensive, pushes back. Zimmerman, defensive and fearful, reacts with escalating aggression. The narrative portrays the fight with raw intensity, focusing on quick movements, sounds, the rustle of jackets, the scrape of shoes against dirt, the thud of bodies against tree trunks. The audience experiences the chaos, the fear, the split-second decisions that lead to catastrophe. In the struggle, a firearm is drawn. The narrative slows again, heightening suspense. Every detail is magnified: the grip of the hand, the widening of eyes, the inhaled breaths, the heartbeats pounding in silence. Trayvon, a boy of 17, stands against the adult's fear and weapon, unarmed except for the courage to defend himself. And then, the shot. The sound is sudden, loud, and horrifying in its finality. Trayvon collapses. The narrative captures the immediate shock and disbelief, the leaves falling around him, the quiet returning, as if mocking the sudden violence. Zimmerman staggers back, disoriented by the act he has just committed, still believing in his own justification, while the boy he shot lies silent on the ground. The audience feels the abruptness, the finality, and the horror of a young life extinguished in a moment. The aftermath begins instantly. Zimmerman calls 911 again, reporting the shooting, his voice tense and shaky. The narrative shifts to the procedural perspective, emergency responders rushing, a sense of urgency mixed with inefficiency, and the stark contrast of Trayvon's lifeless form against the suburban calm of Sanford. Meanwhile, onlookers begin to emerge, curious and horrified, some filming, some calling family members. The quiet, peaceful neighborhood is irrevocably changed in minutes. The streets of Sanford, Florida, that had once been quiet and familiar, now felt heavy, suffused with a tension that could be felt in every corner. News of Trayvon Martin's shooting spread with astonishing speed, first through local whispers, then over phone calls, text messages, and social media. By nightfall, the boy whose life had been cut short had become a story that the nation could not ignore. Trayvon's parents, Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin, were plunged into an unimaginable nightmare. In the first hours, disbelief gave way to horror. They rushed to the scene upon hearing the news, hearts pounding, voices trembling. The sight that greeted them was worse than any nightmare. Trayvon lying motionless beneath the trees, the bag of Skittles still near his hand, the iced tea untouched. Every detail, the hoodie draped over his small frame, the dirt in his hair, the broken silence of the neighborhood, etched itself into their memory, unerasable and suffocating. Sabrina fell to her knees beside her son, hands trembling as she brushed leaves from his face. Tracy stood behind her, gripping her shoulders as though his presence could somehow anchor them both in a reality that had just shattered. The narrative slows here, dwelling on the minute details of grief, the shallow breaths, the tears tracing paths down their faces, the inconsolable shaking of bodies stricken by loss. The audience is meant to feel the intensity of this moment, the human fragility of parents confronted with the unimaginable. Word of the shooting quickly reached national news outlets, and the story exploded across television screens, newspapers, and online platforms. Headlines flashed with Trayvon's name, paired with images of a smiling teenager, headphones around his neck, basketball in hand, a bright young face frozen in the innocence of youth. Social media amplified the narrative, with hashtags like Justice for Trayvon and Trayvon Martin trending within hours. Ordinary citizens, activists, and commentators shared opinions, emotions, and outrage, fueling a national conversation about race, violence, and justice. Protests began to form almost immediately. Groups gathered outside the Sanford Police Department, candles flickering in the early evening wind. Activists, students, and concerned citizens held signs and chanted, demanding accountability. The narrative shifts between the family's personal grief and the collective response of a nation, alternating intimate and expansive perspectives. Scenes of vigils and gatherings convey the emotional scale, while the camera of the narrative lingers on the small human details, the hands clasped in prayer, the whispered names, the quiet sobs mingling with chants. Meanwhile, law enforcement's handling of the situation drew scrutiny and frustration. Zimmerman had been released shortly after questioning, a decision that inflamed public anger. Media coverage highlighted the legal complexities, the procedural decisions, and the mounting tension between a grieving family and a community demanding answers. The audience is given a front-row view of the interplay between bureaucracy, law, and the human longing for justice. The story explores the role of social media as both a force for awareness and a platform for controversy. Videos, tweets, and Facebook posts spread rapidly, sometimes inaccurate, sometimes clarifying, always amplifying emotion. Amateur footage from cell phones captured moments at vigils and protests, creating a sense of immediacy. The narrative emphasizes how technology transformed a local tragedy into a national crisis, allowing people thousands of miles away to witness, mourn, and rally. Interwoven with the national attention is the intimate perspective of Trayvon's family. They navigate the crushing weight of public scrutiny alongside their grief. Sabrina recalls Trayvon's laughter, his small acts of kindness, and the moments that revealed the essence of his spirit. Tracy revisits conversations with his son about trust, safety, and growing up in a world that could be unpredictable and unfair. These reflections humanize Trayvon for the audience, reinforcing the magnitude of the loss and deepening emotional engagement. In the background, the racial dynamics of the case begin to shape public perception. The shooting sparks widespread debate over profiling, prejudice, and the value placed on Black lives in America. Analysts, journalists, and everyday citizens weigh in, each adding layers of complexity to the unfolding narrative. The audience is given a front-row view of the interplay between solidarity and division, portraying the event not merely as a tragedy, but as a mirror reflecting systemic issues in American society. The narrative alternates between moments of stillness and eruptions of collective emotion. Vigils are quiet and reflective, candlelight flickering on faces, murmured prayers, parents holding children close. Then, protests erupting waves of chanting, placards raised high, voices demanding attention. The narrative lingers on small gestures, a single white candle held aloft, a bouquet of flowers left at a makeshift memorial, a young student placing a handwritten note on a tree. These intimate touches resonate, showing that grief is both public and personal. Meanwhile, Trayvon's friends and classmates grapple with confusion and sorrow. Scenes depict empty classrooms, whispered conversations, and the quiet spaces where laughter once echoed. Teachers and counselors provide support, attempting to guide grieving students through their own emotional turmoil. These snapshots add depth to the narrative, showing the widespread impact of a single tragic event on a community still learning to understand loss. As Part 3 progresses, the story begins to show the transformation from individual tragedy to national movement. Black Lives Matter, though not yet fully organized, begins to take shape as activists and community leaders coalesce around the symbol of Trayvon's life and death. Public figures, politicians, and celebrities weigh in, amplifying awareness and forcing broader conversations about race, justice, and accountability. The audience sees the trajectory of a young boy's story becoming a catalyst for societal reflection and activism, intensifying the emotional stakes. The narrative closes Part 3 with a mix of grief and determination. Vigils continue, families cling to memories, and the nation watches with bated breath as the legal system prepares for the trial that will dominate headlines for months. The audience is left with a dual sense of sorrow and anticipation, the deep emotional impact of Trayvon's death and the expectation of societal reckoning. The months following Trayvon Martin's death were marked by relentless scrutiny, emotional exhaustion, and an unyielding search for justice. Sanford, Florida, a quiet suburban town just weeks before had been a backdrop for ordinary life, now found itself under the unflinching gaze of the nation. Cameras crowded the courthouse, journalists hovered outside Zimmerman's home, and social media erupted with opinions, debates, and emotional tributes. Trayvon's parents, Sabrina Fulton and Tracy Martin, had been living in a world that balanced grief and advocacy. Each day, their sorrow interwove with a new purpose, to ensure that their son's story would not be forgotten, to demand accountability, and to speak on behalf of those who could not. Their lives became a constant sequence of interviews, public appearances, and meetings with civil rights groups. Despite the public attention, private grief was inescapable. Trayvon's room remained untouched, a shrine to a boy who had been vibrant, ordinary, and full of potential. Each glance at his photographs, the wide smile, the headphones, the basketball in midair, reminded them of the life that had been cut short. The trial of George Zimmerman became a spectacle, dissected by media across the country. The courtroom was tense from the moment proceedings began. Journalists and spectators crowded the benches. Cameras captured every movement. Lawyers presented their arguments with precision, the prosecution painting a picture of racial profiling and unjustifiable fear, the defense framing Zimmerman as a man who acted in self-defense, convinced he was protecting himself in a threatening situation. The narrative alternates perspectives, allowing the audience to see the trial from the courtroom, the parents' viewpoint, and the broader public reaction. Witnesses took the stand, recounting the events with varying degrees of clarity and reliability. The prosecution highlighted the timeline of events, emphasizing the short span of time between Trayvon's walk and the fatal shooting. The defense focused on Zimmerman's perceived fear and the legal right to self-defense under Florida's Stand Your Ground law. The courtroom became a battleground of narratives, each side presenting the story in a way that either humanized or demonized the participants. For the audience, the tension is palpable. Every testimony, every objection, every pause in the courtroom is loaded with emotional weight. Outside the courtroom, protests continued. Vigils and rallies demanded justice for Trayvon. Activists called for systemic change, highlighting the racial undertones of the tragedy and demanding legislative review of self-defense laws. Social media kept the conversation alive, trending hashtags, memorial pages, and petitions circulating across platforms. The nation was polarized, some defending Zimmerman, some demanding justice for Trayvon. Every news cycle amplified the tension, ensuring that no one could ignore the weight of the case. Inside the courtroom, the narrative slows to focus on human details, the furrowed brows of Trayvon's parents, the silent nods between lawyers, the fleeting expressions of the jury. These small moments are magnified, giving the audience a sense of the immense pressure weighing on every individual. The storytelling emphasizes the emotional stakes, ensuring that viewers understand the gravity beyond legal technicalities. The verdict arrived on a warm summer afternoon. A hush fell over the courtroom as the jury read its decision. George Zimmerman was acquitted of all charges. The announcement echoed through the courtroom, and outside, reactions erupted in an instant. Some wept openly, others shouted in anger, and still others watched in stunned silence. The narrative captures this emotional contrast, reflecting the division in public sentiment while remaining grounded in the human cost of the tragedy. Trayvon's parents reacted with restrained heartbreak, their sorrow mingled with a steely determination. They spoke publicly, emphasizing the loss of their son and calling for continued advocacy for youth who, like Trayvon, live under the shadow of racial bias and systemic injustice. Their words resonated across the nation, inspiring individuals and groups to consider the broader implications of Trayvon's death. In the weeks and months following the verdict, the legacy of Trayvon Martin began to take shape. His death had become a symbol, a rallying point for discussions on race, policing, and justice in America. The Black Lives Matter movement, though still young, gained momentum, fueled in part by the emotional resonance of Trayvon's story. Vigils, marches, and educational campaigns across the country invoked his memory as a catalyst for change. The narrative emphasizes the transformative power of a single life lost, how grief and outrage can converge into societal reflection and action. The story shifts to reflective moments, painting Trayvon not merely as a symbol, but a real boy, full of dreams and potential. Flashbacks capture him playing basketball with friends, laughing over jokes, strumming a guitar, and framing the world through his budding photography. These glimpses humanize him for the audience, reinforcing the emotional impact of the loss. The narrative underscores that behind every statistic, hashtag, or news headline, there was a human life with depth, personality, and promise. As time passes in the narrative, the story explores the cultural and social implications of Trayvon's death. Discussions in schools, community centers, and public forums debate racial profiling, gun laws, and the meaning of self-defense legislation. Trayvon's story becomes a lens through which society examines itself, prompting dialogue, reflection, and for some, meaningful action. The narrative ensures that the audience sees the wider ramifications while maintaining the deeply personal impact on those closest to him. The conclusion of Part 4 focuses on the enduring legacy of Trayvon Martin. Memorials and scholarships are established in his name. Families who had experienced similar tragedies find solidarity and strength in the movement that grew from his story. Trayvon's parents continue to advocate for youth and racial justice, their lives forever intertwined with the mission of ensuring that no other parent has to endure what they experienced. The narrative closes with a reflective tone. Trayvon's life, though tragically short, left an indelible mark on a nation forced to confront uncomfortable truths about race, fear, and justice. The audience is left with a mixture of sorrow and hope. Sorrow for the young life cut short, hope in the awareness, movements, and conversations his story sparked. The cinematic focus on human emotion, national impact, and enduring legacy ensures that viewers finish the story not just informed, but profoundly moved.